celebrating the art of storytelling and the artists who bring stories to life. This is the Viewfinder Podcast with Chris Hadley.
On this week's show, I'm joined by Emmy-winning composer Jeff Russo, who explores the chilling orchestral soundscapes of his music for FX's Alien Earth, his latest partnership with longtime creative collaborator and fellow musician Noah Hawley, and the first ever TV adaptation of the popular film franchise. Alien Earth is a series that, like its theatrical predecessors, puts a crew of intergalactic soldiers against monsters both otherworldly and human. As the famous tagline for the first Alien movie proclaimed, "In space, no one can hear you scream." Yet with Alien Earth's score both honoring the eerie but unforgettable musical standards set by past franchise composers as Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner and Elliot Goldenthal, and, like the TV series, establishing itself as an innovative and uniquely original masterpiece of suspense, space has never sounded scarier or more exhilarating. Here now, my interview with Jeff about Alien Earth, and please be advised there are a few spoilers for those who haven't seen the show. Jeff Russo is the composer of the new FX series Alien Earth. Jeff, welcome to the Viewfinder Podcast. It is truly an honor to speak with you today and to have you on to talk about this incredible score. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a labor of love for sure for the last number of years.
Now, this is your latest collaboration with the show's writer and director Noah Hawley, who you've worked with on such acclaimed series as Fargo and Legion. Given that this is the very first TV adaptation of Alien, and given the expansive material that you had to work with, how did that influence your approach to scoring it in any way?
I always look at something like this as wanting to create a unique voice and at the same time acknowledging where we've been, where this, what the basis for this story is, and where other composers have taken this particular type of musical storytelling. So in that, like, I'm always trying to walk that line between being being original and being unique and having our own voice and paying the correct amount of homage to what's come before.
Well, the Alien franchise is known for its experimental and terrifying scores by Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, and Elliot Goldenthal, among others. You decided to take a completely different approach to the music for this series. Describe how that approach worked and what makes your score both unique from and similar to those of the Alien movies in terms of dramatic impact and sound design.
I mean, that might be a little misleading in what you were saying. Like,
Okay.
I don't know that I wanted to take a completely different look at what the score might be, because there are certain things and ways that music can draw tension and draw fear and terror into a person's psyche while watching. But at the same time, I did want to take a look at the interaction of characters and what that emotionality, if that's a word, might sound like. There's a major storyline in season 1 where there's this brother and sister, and there's a love between a brother and sister that needed to be marked by music. And it's interesting when you're talking about a love theme, typically you're talking about romantic love, and in this particular case, the love theme for proper in our show is about the love of a brother and a sister, and the brother thinking that the sister had been long dead, and realizing that she wasn't, and now she has been sort of put into this new body, and it's very complex. So what I wanted to do was really dive into that relationship from a musical perspective, and that to me is something new in the scoring for the Alien franchise, the sort of looking for a more emotional portion of the score to take center stage. there's also this relationship that grows between Wendy and the xenomorph, right? Like her ability to communicate with the xenomorph, and obviously this is spoilers if you haven't seen the rest of the show, but what you realize later in the season is that she has an understanding of the aliens that no human has had human. I say human, she's only part human, but no being has had in our Alien franchise. So I wanted to sort of dive into that as well. That is where I think the score for Alien Earth sort of takes a different tack than Jerry's score or James Horner's score or to a certain extent Elliot Goldenthal's score.
And we'll get to that theme for Wendy and her brother, the siblings theme, in a little bit. But tonally and thematically, what makes your score similar to and different from your work on Fargo and Legion, as well as your scores for the Star Trek universe?
Well, when you talk about the differences in tonality between different projects, it's like that has less to do with me and more to do with the story itself, right? I'm there simply to serve as a conduit for helping to tell the story. So, you know, how does Alien Earth differ from Fargo? My process is not very different. The process that I go through in order to write a score for either one of those things is pretty similar, I would say. Like I read a script, I try to get into the heads of the characters and into the story and allow it to wash over me, and then see how that affects what comes out in terms of music, right? With Fargo, it's an emotional story as well, but it's also very dramatic, and we use that drama to great effect in Fargo. The way that affects the show is more to do with the show than it does with the music that I'm writing. I think that I always try to, you know, go to what a character is feeling rather than what a character is doing. And that to me is the same process I use pretty much in all projects.
You've described scoring this series as like scoring for a quote, an 8 hour film. As a complete whole, how did you structure the music to fit that framework and to feel like a single united work across all 8 episodes of the show?
Well, I have to tie, all these episodes together thematically, right? So that's really what I mean by saying that I have to score it like an 8-hour movie, because it isn't individual stories that are split up by these, sort of these spaces between episodes. The story goes from episode 1 to episode 8, and the story will continue in season 2. Um, so as I look at it as a whole story, I have to think about how that affects music, and how music that I'm playing in episode 1 might also need to be playing in episodes 4 or 7 or 8, and how they will all connect, because we are telling one long story.
You created several key themes for the series, one for excuse me, one for Wendy, plus a siblings theme for Wendy and her brother that we referred to earlier, and another for the corporation that's overseeing the space mission, and the xenomorph theme, which we'll get into a little bit later. How are these themes developed? How did you differentiate each of them in terms of emotional impact? And how do those motifs evolve and vary over the course of the series in a musical standpoint?
Well, the siblings theme came about when I read the first script and was talking with Noah, and Noah said to me, he said, we definitely need a theme for Wendy, but we also definitely need a theme that has to do with the feelings between, brother and sister. So it was an early theme written before they'd really shot much in the way of picture, which is from when I'm working with Noah, the way a lot of themes are created, it's created from the script, looking at how Noah's telling the story, and then wanting to write music that will he can listen to that will then maybe bounce ideas from that off into the ether. And it does grow, right? You really hear that theme played for the first time in episode 2 when Hermit discovers or is told that Wendy is his sister, and then he finally believes it when she answers the question about what he said on Christmas morning. And when she answered that, the theme sort of plays as a result of this overwhelming emotion that he's having. That theme then sort of reappears throughout the episodes as their relationship changes. He continues to believe that he needs to protect Wendy, and Wendy is the one who's trying to explain to him that she does not, in fact, need his protection. And I think maybe even the tables are turned. She is, in fact, trying to protect him. So as it transverses the season, what you'll find is melodically, I start to turn stuff around. I start to play some of those melodies backwards. And as that happens to me, that is how I relate to the differences in what the narrative is doing over time. As for the Wayland-Yutani theme, like, you really don't hear the Wayland-Yutani theme until a little later, when you realize that it is that corporation that's involved in the crash, the Maginot's crash, and the Maginot was a Wayland-Yutani ship. And then you definitely start to hear it as those characters become more and more important.
Yeah. And you took a very economical approach in coming up with these themes, and you frequently rearranged them whenever the situation called for it. How did that work out, and in what ways do the themes vary in terms of instrumentation and tone?
Well, I think that I usually go to specific instruments for specific ideas, right? So I might play the siblings theme on a high flute if it was meant to be a little lighter. When there is danger, it might go down to like a contrabass flute and or low strings. And I use orchestration to help me change the feeling of what a piece of music is trying to convey to the audience, while still keeping the idea of the melody in the head of the audience to keep them connected. I do that a lot. That's something that I tend to do just in order to track the change of the narrative in any story.
For the Alien, you designed an original instrument called the bass desmophone, which represents both the menacing and destructive presence of the alien in such an incredibly powerful and physical fashion. How is this built? What does it comprise of in an instrumental sense? How is it integrated into the larger orchestral framework of the score? And how did you determine where and when to insert it?
Well, to be clear, I didn't design the instrument. I had it built by a company who does these types of
Okay.
instrument design. I saw an instrument that they had built called a desmophone, and what I wondered was, would there be a way to build a version that is a bass version of that, which is the whole octave below. Um, it is a two-stringed instrument that has no frets but has a soundboard and is a triangular piece of hollow metal. So it's very reverberant. And I use it with a bow. I use it with a super ball that I can drag across it. It makes very evocative sounds, and it did become sort of the sound of the xenomorph to a certain degree, but more. The part of it really did sound like when the Maginot crashed into the building. as it was sitting there, you would hear it move, and all of the metal in the ship would bend, and you'd hear it moan. And that sound, I was able to sort of also recreate with this instrument, which I thought was very interesting. So I was able to use that sound inside the score. And it sounds like a groan. It sounds like a moaning and a longing, painful longing. And that to me became the sort of underpinnings of the sound of the xenomorph, on top of a scream that I was able to recreate using something called an Aztec death whistle. And you hear that sound throughout the score as well. I definitely needed sounds that I could mark some of the new aliens that we have appearing, the image, the ticks, and all these different species that were aboard the Maginot. I needed a way to sort of have sounds for them, but not have to figure out like a different sound for every species, because there are now a few more than just the one. So it was really more about the threat level rather than each individual alien.
And the Aztec death whistle, does that also represent the fear of the crew?
Well, I'm not sure that it represents their fear, but it does represent the impending doom of the xenomorph, which typically when you have a xenomorph and a human in the same room, the xenomorph is not going to be too happy, and it's going to probably kill that human.
Right. And the other textures that you use, synth pads, voices, prepared piano, percussive strikes, and drones, how do those textures mirror not just the claustrophobic and dangerous surroundings of the spaceship, but also the ominous presence of the xenomorphs and the moral ambiguities of the ship's crew?
You know, Sound is an interesting thing, right? It can be very evocative, and it can also be very off-putting. So I typically try to assemble a group of sounds that I will be able to use throughout a series. And all of the things that you mentioned were things that I started to put together before I actually started writing melodies for the score, because I knew what kind of sound palette and sound um, universe or atmosphere I wanted to create. That was more about wanting to create an atmosphere of tension and an atmosphere of hanging off an edge without knowing if you were going to fall. Like, one of the things that didn't want to be we didn't want to lean too heavily into the jump scare, right? We do have jump scares. We do have moments where something happens quickly and you get startled. But most of the terror and most of the feeling of danger comes when we have a slow reveal of the xenomorph, which is pretty typical of the Alien franchise. And that to me, drawn out with those long sounds that I've created, I think helped draw out a lot of that tension and fear.
You also wrote a theme for the alien, which is heard in the cue Xenomorph, that, though very dark and suspenseful, emphasizes the ambiguity of the aliens as creatures and the fact that both the series and the previous Alien movies do not clearly frame them as good or evil. How did you capture that ambiguity in a musical sense in this theme?
Well, I think that has to do with like not having resolves in musical terms. It's like nothing in that particular piece of music. It doesn't feel like it ever resolves, and that was very important to me, because with the realization that we don't actually know who the bad guys are, who the good guys are. I, I don't think the aliens are the bad guys. They're scary and they kill people, but um, you know, Ripley in the second film had that famous line. It's like, about who were the bad guys. It's like you don't see them, screwing over the other aliens for a dime, right? Or
Right.
for a dollar. And I feel like I needed to really dive into that head first. So I needed to write a piece of music that felt dark, but didn't really lead you one way or another. It just felt tense. And that was sort of the impetus for that. I'm sure I'll have to continue down that line for season two.
Now, the score's orchestral portions were recorded at the legendary Abbey Road Studios in London, which, as we all know, was famous for where the Beatles recorded their classic albums. What was that experience like? What was your memories of conducting these sessions there, and how did it make you feel, knowing its incredible history and knowing that you'd be working on this music there?
Well, it's interesting. Abbey Road is yes, it's a shrine to the Beatles. It's a shrine to popular music, and also film scores. Like some of my favorite film scores were recorded there. And when actually specifically the siblings theme, when we played that high string line that plays, um, as it played in the room, all of us were very stunned by how familiar it sounded. And not the melody itself, but the sound of the room. It felt like a warm blanket put around us, because all of a sudden I could hear the scores of my childhood that I grew up listening to. So it was pretty incredible. Now, getting on the podium and conducting those incredible musicians, as I do here in LA for Trek, and as I have in many different places, it's an honor, and to be on the stand at Abbey Road is even sort of more, it's more deep. It's dream come true for a kid who grew up, learning how to play guitar by listening to Jimmy Page play guitar, who recorded records there. And
Yeah.
he was one of the most famous session musicians, playing on all kinds of movie scores and records that were made at Abbey Road, and the Beatles, and me learning how to play guitar, listening to the Beatles. So all of that coalesces with me going there for the first time to record this my score for this project. Was an experience that's almost incomprehensible and certainly almost indescribable.
And besides the score, another key piece of the soundtrack is the show's main title theme, which is a cover version of the 1967 Cream hit Strange Brew, which Noah performs and you arranged and produced. Given that you both have experience in rock music and have both played in bands, you of course being the lead guitarist for the group Tonic, how did that experience factor into the making of this version of the song? How does its arrangement differ from the original while fitting the tone of the show's score? And how did you both work on tailoring it to establish the dramatic mood and feel of the series, especially in that lyric, "Kill what's inside of you"?
I think that lyric was really the jumping off point for Noah and why he wanted to use that. When he called me and said he wanted to use it, I was flummoxed at first, because it's an up-tempo blues song that I was like, I'm not sure how that works. And Noah was basically like, you'll figure it out. So it was one of those things where I knew that I needed to have the melody in that lyric, but how could I frame it in terms of the score? How could I frame it in terms of what we're doing for the music? So, I started writing a piece of music and arranging it so that lyric and melody could fit right on top. And when we recorded it, it was one of those things where the funny part of it is, Noah, when he has an idea for a song, when he has an idea for a cover song, he'll typically like sit with his guitar, because Noah's a musician as well. He'll play and then use his iPhone and like record it and send it to me. In this particular case, he had just sent me him singing it into his phone. So I took that recording and put it into my system and started manipulating it and screwing around with it, and then adding all of my arrangement ideas to it. And in the end, that's what we came up with. We then had to re-record him singing, because I had messed it up so much, and it came, the source material was so sort of not great. It's not great when you're just sitting there singing on your iPhone. It's fine for the idea, but you know, I needed a little bit better of a recording of it. And so we re-recorded that, and then you've heard what we ended up with.
In addition to a second season of Alien Earth, as you've discussed, You've also scored the upcoming Apple TV adaptation of the 1962 film Cape Fear, as well as the upcoming fourth season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Tell me a little bit more about those projects, if you can, as well as anything else you've got coming out or are working on right now.
So for Strange New Worlds, I don't do the score. I wrote the main title theme
Okay.
and the title theme, and I have overseen the score for Nami Malumed, who is a fantastic composer.
Yes.
She great scores for for that show. I'm currently starting the second season of Starfleet Academy, but I did just finish Cape Fear for Apple TV, which comes out in a couple of weeks. And that was a tall order. There is a lot of history with that particular film. There's a 1962 film with the score written by Bernard Herrmann, a 1991 film with the score with Bernard Herrmann's score adapted and rearranged for by Elmer Bernstein, and then our 10-episode version of it, which had me utilizing Herrmann's melodies in certain parts, my writing an original score, and then also adapting some of what Elmer Bernstein had done from 91. It was all sort of a mishmash of everything. It is a spectacularly scary show. It is a show that lives up to its name, lives up to the previous filmmakers, Scorsese being the most well-known one that is very influential in terms of this show. We had Scorsese and Mr. Spielberg as executive producers, basically, guiding the whole process, along with Nick Antosca, who is the showrunner and creator of the show. But it is a testament to the telling of that story, a testament to how creepy and deep the story is, that we could make a new version of it and have it be as menacing as that first one was. And the second one, obviously, who would have thought that anyone could play Max Cady any better than De Niro? But Javier Bardem is really, really, really menacing. And if you've ever seen No Country for Old Men, you will agree that he is a person who can really get that menace across without having to say much.
And finally, what have you taken away from scoring Alien Earth, and what do you hope audiences and listeners take away from hearing your score for it both inside and outside the series?
Well, it's interesting for me. I'm a storyteller, so my greatest joy is if someone says the story is great, like what you did really underscores the story. It's not I'm not hoping that people listen to the score outside of the show and or movie unless they're drawn to it after seeing the movie. I mean, the music is, I try to write music that is both listenable outside and inside the show, but it's all created with a single and sole purpose of connecting viewer and narrative, right? So the hope is always that I'm hoping that I'm helping to move the story along and tell this story.
You definitely have done that, not just on this show, but also on all the other shows and films that you worked on. It has truly been an honor to speak with you today about this score for Alien Earth, Jeff, and I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it. I appreciate talking about it, and thank you for having me.
That's the Viewfinder Podcast for this week. I'm Chris Hadley. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, please stay safe, everyone.
The Viewfinder Podcast is hosted, written, produced, and edited by Chris Hadley. The show's title logo is designed by Madison LeBlanc. Our theme music, Call to Adventure, is composed by Scott Buckley and appears under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Be sure to like, listen, and subscribe to the Viewfinder Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out video versions of the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Viewfinder Podcast with Chris H., all one word. Let us know what you think by leaving a review on this or any other episode. If you have any questions, comments, and or guest suggestions, or if you'd like to join Chris as a guest on an upcoming episode of the show, please contact us at theviewfinderpodcast@gmail.com That's the Viewfinder Podcast at gmail.com. Follow us on X at ViewfinderPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/The Viewfinder Podcast, and on Instagram at The Viewfinder Podcast. This has been The Viewfinder Podcast with Chris Hadley. This is Eric Wood speaking.